webinar on space, place and topography, geographical imaginations in Indian writing in English, organized by the Department of English, Seva Bharati Mahavidyalaya, Jhargram, West Bengal, and IQAC of Seva Bharati Mahavidyalaya, in collaboration with the Department of English, Subarnarekha Mahavidyalaya, Gopiballavpur, West Bengal, India, and IQAC of Subarnarekha Mahavidyalaya. Now, as far as the proceedings of day 1 is concerned, we had a thoroughly engaging day with Dr. Robert T. Talley Jr., professor of Texas State University, speaking about the interconnected relationship between space, place, and literature. We had many fascinating papers on within the rubric of geopolitical perspective, and hopefully the events of day 2 will also live up to the expectations of day 1. We are thoroughly overjoyed with the kind of response we have received as far as the webinar is concerned. I take this opportunity, first of all, to express my gratitude to the chief patron of the webinar, Mr. Babulal Mahato, Honorable SDO and Administrator of Seva Bharati Mahavidyalaya. We are really grateful to Dr. Maiki for being the convener, and Shominjana, the joint convener of the webinar, and all the other stakeholders who are associated with this webinar. With that, let me introduce you to the first speaker of the day, Dr. Mujahid Panda. Is available. Is Dr.
Yes, I am here. Yes, I am here.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining with us. Before I introduce our speaker for the day, let me say a few words about Dr. Mujahid Panda. Yes. Dr. Mujahid Panda is an assistant professor in the West Bengal Educational Service and head in the Department of English at Government General Degree College, Day-2, affiliated to Vidyasagar University, Midnapur. He did his PhD on the works of Seamus Haney and Philip Larkin from Vidyasagar University in 2017 and has widely published in many national and international journals and books. Some of his important publications include a chapter entitled Tropical Diseases and Helpless Colonial Responses, Medical Humanism in Green's Journey Without Maps, and Farrell's The Siege of Krishnapur, published in Imperial Maladies, Literature on Healthcare and Psychoanalysis in India, 2017, by Neuroscience Publishers, New York, USA, and Sense of Place, a humanistic geographical approach to the themes of place, memory, and displacement in Bob Dylan songs, in Rupkatha Journal on Interdisciplinary Studies in Humanities in 2017. And he has also published an edited volume on Indian classic literature from Routledge Publication. A monograph on special literary theory is published from Oxford University Press. He has presented papers in many national and international conferences, seminars across India. With this brief...
Rick Babu, your microphone is muted. Okay, Ujjwal, proceed.
Okay. Just a minute. Good evening, everyone. Today is the second day of the international webinar that is jointly being organized by the Department of English, Seva Bharati Mahavidyalaya, and the Department of English and IQAC, Subarnarekha Mahavidyalaya. I heartily thank the organizers of this webinar for inviting me to deliver a talk, and I especially thank Somita and Showman, who are close friends, for giving me this opportunity to talk before such a variety of learned audience. Okay. The title of my talk today is Literature's Non-Place, Making and Unmaking of Place in Satyajit Ray's Professor Shonku Stories. Perhaps all of us are acquainted with the names like Feluda and Professor Shonku. They are actually our childhood heroes, and at some junctures of our life, we had gone through the stories of Feluda or Shonku. And today, the matter of concern is in which way the humanistic geographical idea of non-place is related to science fiction in general, and how it is actually found in the stories of Professor Shonku, written by Ray. Now, before we go for a detailed discussion of what a non-place is, it is very important to know what precisely is
So we are not being
place.
able to hear you. I think there has been some problem with the mic.
No, it's
Ujjwal,
audible.
that's
It's audible.
Ujjwal, that's clearly audible actually.
Panda
Ujjwal,
is
it's clearly
audible.
audible. Yeah.
Perhaps the problem with your
Yeah, it's
system.
audible.
Okay.
I
Am I
think,
audible to all of you?
Yes,
yes, Ujjwal, you are audible, perfectly audible.
but
Okay.
Audible.
Okay.
you
Okay.
proceed.
Thank you.
Ujjwal.
Thank you. Now, before we start to deal with the concept of non-place in relation to geocriticism and humanistic geography, it is important to know about the idea of place in the sphere of humanistic geography and geocriticism in general. Now, what precisely a place is according to humanistic geography? It is important to know. Place is a fundamental condition of human existence on Earth. As living beings, we are always located in a specific place. Our identity is essentially structured by the geographical and cultural specificity of a place where we live in. Now, in its literal sense, the term place is very innocent, as we know, because it is a term that may mean any geographical site or any geographical locale or any geographical territory, which may be small, which may be big. And from that point of view, place can be a room of one's own. It may be the house of a particular person. It may be a state, it may be a country, it may be a continent. And interestingly, place may stand for the planet itself or the world itself. Okay. But apart from these literal meanings of a particular place, there are diverse interpretations of the term place, which is not a very easy term to deal with as far as humanistic geography or geocriticism is concerned. Okay. And there are numerous or diverse interpretations of the term place in geocriticism and humanistic geography. Eric Prieto, in his famous book, Literature, Geography and the Postmodern Poetics of Place, that was published in 2012, has tried to gather different theoretical interpretations about place, and in that particular book, he has referred to place as basically a space that is actually enriched with human experience and understanding. Or it is actually an organized world of meaning. For David Massey, place is, I quote, a particular constellation of social relations. Again, according to Altman and Lowe, place is a setting to which individuals are emotionally and culturally attached. Again, to Lippard, place is the locus of desire. So when we actually come across these definitions of place given by different geocritics and humanistic geographers, one thing that strikes our mind is that place is basically an experiential perspective. If we do not experience, or if we do not attach our feeling or emotion to a certain territory or space, the space cannot turn into a place. Therefore, the phenomenological perspective of a space is important to understand what place is. And from that point of view, there is a clear distinction between the two terms, although in dictionary or in the literal sense, the two terms, space and place, they are somehow similar. But as far as humanistic geography is concerned, there is a huge gap between the term place and the term space. Now, place in the sphere of humanistic geography is actually the learned and conscious idea of a space. Space may be the whole world or a territory of being on earth with no specific human emotion attached to it. And the non-specific, undefined territory called space becomes a place when human beings know, give meaning, and attach their emotion and experience to it. So it is very important to know the difference between space and place to understand what non-place is, or the exact opposite of the term place is. Since the 1970s, when the so-called spatial turn in literature began to take root, and Michel Foucault famously defined the modern age of literary criticism as the epoch of space in his 1984 essay of Other Spaces, there had always been some reservations among critics concerning the possible connection between literature and geography. Now, why? Because geography, as we know, it is actually a branch of earth science, where we actually measure the climate, the landscape, the ups and downs, the topography. But literature, as we know, it is an enterprise based upon human imagination. And there are many places that we find in literature which are not actually real places. They are actually figments of human imagination. From that point of view, there were reservations among critics about the possible interconnection between geography and literature. But with the advancement in the fields of humanistic geography that actually put human experience at the core of geographical imagination, the interrelation between geography and literature, it was no more thought to be a kind of disciplinary oddity. Okay. Now, coming to the concept of non-place, because we have already known the idea of place and space in literature, and now we have to understand what is non-place and how it is related to the world of science fiction. Okay. Non-place is a term which became current in 1964 with the publication of M. Weber's essay Urban Place and the Non-Place Urban Realm. Later, the term got an all-new dimension in Mark Ozzy's seminal book, Non-Place, Introduction to an Anthropology of Supermodernity. And the book was published in 1995. Ozzy had seen non-place in terms of the socio-cultural conditions in the post-capitalist era. And from that point of view, when Ozzy was dealing with the concept of non-place, he was not directly referring to literary geographies. He was referring to the post-capitalist or super-modern social conditions. Okay. In the book, Ozzy has drawn a distinction between two kinds of places that we find in modern world. One is anthropological place and the other is non-place. So what is anthropological place according to Ozzy? I'm quoting from the book. According to Ozzy, an anthropological place, I quote, organizes space and imbues it with meaning, identity, and history. It represents the concrete and symbolic construction of space that serves as a reference for all those it assigns to a position, however humble or modest. The anthropological place then provides a principle of meaning for the people who live in it and also a principle of intelligibility for the person who observes it. Now, from that particular perspective, places slice up the manifold of space into meaningful units that are connected to history and identity. They connect space with time and create a sense of community that allows the individual to connect both with his or her neighbor as well as with history. Ozzy contrasts these anthropological places or places where we may connect historically, socially, culturally with those places which are there in our society but we do not connect with them emotionally or historically. And those places are non-places. So what are the examples of such places? Such places are actually some inevitable byproducts of supermodernity and post-capitalist era. So what are those places which are there in our society but they are only some places of transit? We are not actually attached to them emotionally or historically or culturally. Ozzy mentions different types of non-places through which people move with virtual anonymity. What are the places? He has referred to supermarkets, airports and airplanes, superhighways and communication networks. Although Ozzy has spent little time on the communication networks because when he was publishing the book, then the world had not witnessed the boom of internet and mobile phones. But he has referred to different territories which are there in our society, but we are not connected to them. Now, from that point of view, these places are non-places. Why? Because according to humanistic geography, a space becomes place when we actually attach our emotion attach our cultural identity with it. If we do not attach our emotion, our feeling, our identity with a certain territory, it may not be a place. And therefore, these are the places which we use in course of our daily life. We actually travel through a station, an airport, or a highway, but we just use them. We never
Ujjwal, your microphone is muted. Ujjwal.
Sir, seems to be some problem with your microphone, sir.
Ujjwal.
साउंड बढ़ाइए
Sir, can you hear me? Sir, your microphone is off.
ওনার ফোনের সাউন্ডটা বাড়ান, বাড়ালে তবে গিয়ে শুনতে পাবো, না হলে কি করে শুনতে পাবো? মাইক্রোফোনের সাউন্ড কমে।
Your sound is off, sir. Yes, now it's okay.
Okay.
Now it is audible.
Now it's audible, sir.
Now it is audible. Now it is audible.
Okay. So from this point of view, non-places also make a connection between space and texts. In which way? The real world non-places, which Ajay has referred to in his book, if we closely notice them, they actually provide some instructions for use or directions and prohibitions that guide the user about how to use them. For example, there are various signs in supermarkets, the road markers on highways, the guidelines in airports and airplanes. These are all texts, and those instructions actually familiarize man with placelessness that a non-place actually poses upon him. But Ajay has referred to another types of non-places which exist only in words. That is important. These are all non-places which are found in the real world, and these are, as we know, as I have already referred to, these are all some inevitable byproducts of post-capitalist supermodernity. But there are other kinds of non-places that only exist in the words that evoke them. Science fiction particularly creates non-places with words and, broadly speaking, texts. As Ajay mentions, I quote from the book, certain places exist only through the words that evoke them. And in this sense, they are non-places or imaginary places. Here, the word does not create a gap between everyday function and lost myth. It creates image, produces the myth, and at the same time makes it work. Okay. Now, science fiction pushes us outside our everyday life to a non-place that creates new myths of reality, identity, and history that differ radically from those of our quotidian experiences. By taking a journey through these non-places, we move into a textual space that rethinks the very nature of place from the ground up. Okay, history and identity are recreated, and it allows us to critically engage with the manner the narrative defines it. Okay. Interestingly, like the real non-places of supermodernity, the science fictional non-place also give us direction for use. So what may be the direction for use in science fiction for the reader? It may sound like that: forget your known place and your own identity, rethink them, and accept a kind of space that is foundationless because it remains undisturbed by traditional narratives that organize and ultimately control our existence. And there is a slight difference between fiction and science fiction in that fiction actually deals with the idea of being on earth, but science fiction does not deal with the idea of being. It deals with the idea of becoming. And from that point of view, a text in a science fiction which actually describes a non-place, it actually depends upon the idea of chaos, because what happens in a science fiction is the very vice versa of the consistency of our being on earth. And from that point of view, the textual space in a science fiction is very akin to the idea of the plane of immanence. The plane of immanence is a particular concept that was propounded by Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari in their seminal book Philosophy. Okay, according to Deleuze and Guattari, the plane of immanence is like a section of chaos and acts like a sieve. Chaos is not an inert or stationary state, nor is it a chance mixture. Chaos makes chaotic and undoes every consistency in the infinite. The problem of philosophy is to acquire a consistency without losing the infinite into which thought plunges. By making a section of chaos, the plane of immanence requires a creation of concepts. The science fiction is essentially creative because it deals with imaginary places. It deals with the idea of chaos. But interestingly, at the same time, it creates and recreates our known world, or it makes and unmakes our known world. And from that point of view, science fiction may be a place where the idea of non-place can be most faithfully found. Okay. And now coming to the Professor Shonku stories. As we know, Trilokeshwar Shonku, who is better known as Professor Shonku, has been an iconic character created by Ray in Bengali literature. According to many critics, Ray actually based the character of Shonku on Professor Challenger by Arthur Conan Doyle, and a character called Heshoram Hoshiar, which we find in his father Sukumar Ray's short story Heshoram Hoshiarer Diary, or the Diary of Heshoram Hoshiar. Written in the form of diary, we first meet this Giridi-based maverick scientist when Bomjatri's diary, or the diary of a space traveler, appeared in children's magazine Sandesh in 1961. In Diary of a Space Traveler, we are informed that Professor Shonku had disappeared about 15 years ago. Some believed that something had gone terribly wrong while he was doing experiments and that had killed him, but others were wont to say that he was still alive. He was just hiding in some remote corner of the country to continue his work in secret. He would come out when the time was right. The writer had access to Professor Shonku's diary very interestingly, when his friend and a small-time writer Tarok Chatterjee found the diary in the Sundarbans at the site of a fallen meteorite. Now, the site of a fallen meteorite, it is actually a traditional non-place on Earth, because we actually avoid it. We are afraid of it because of our lack of familiarization with it. Since then, several adventures of Professor Shonku forayed into many unknown and mysterious territories, not only in this planet, but in the outer space also. For example, the journey of a space traveler is set in Mars and recreates.
Sir, your audio is muted. Sir. Kindly unmute yourself.
কেন যে আনমিউট হচ্ছে তো বুঝতে পারছি না। ওকে,
It's okay right now. Okay, sir.
Now it's okay. Ujjwal, now it is okay.
So there are numerous examples of non-places in the Professor Shonku stories. I am referring to the story Boom Jatri Diary, or the diary of a space traveler. We landed on Mars 2 hours ago. I am writing my diary sitting on a soft yellow rocky mound. Everything here, the trees, the ground, stones, rock, is kind of soft and feels like rubber. A little distance away, a red river is flowing by. It took me a while to realize that it was a river, as its water looked like clear jelly, a bit like guava jelly. Perhaps all rivers here are red. It is these rivers that had appeared as red threads from space. What had struck me as water, it turned out, was grass and trees and plants. All of it is blue instead of green. What is green in the sky? What is green is the sky. Everything is opposite of what we see on Earth. Okay. Now, what is happening here is the idea of chaos, because what we are encountering in the textual space of a science fiction does not happen in reality. And from that point of view, it challenges the sense of consistency of being, and it is turning into a narrative dealing with the sense of becoming. And all science fiction, they actually try to postulate the idea of becoming in one way or other. Okay. Now, if we go through another story, the Unicorn Expedition or Akshringo Obhijan in Bengali, that was published in Sandesh in 1973, Shonku follows the path of the dead explorer and scientist Charles Wheeler in search of unicorns and reaches a remote place in Tibet where all those lost animals, even mythical ones, are still alive, although they are destroyed in front of him. The primitive place called Dunglung Do has been described in terms of imaginary non-place. I'm quoting a very small portion from the book. But is not just a forest of gorgeous trees. We had proceeded a mile or so along the northern wall when we were suddenly confronted with open country bereft of vegetation. Before us were enormous boulders with caves in them from which emerged blood-curdling roars and snarls. We realized we had come to the region of legendary demons and rakshasas, a common feature of fairy tales of all nations. Okay. Now, a big herd of animals, both adult and young, were passing in front of us.
each looked like a cross between a crow and a horse, was pinkish grey in color, and had a single spiral horn on its forehead. I realized that they were what launched us on our expedition. They were unquestionably unicorns, Pliny's unicorns, the unicorn of Western mythology, the unicorn of the seals of Mohenjo-daro. Actually, Dunglungdo is an unlikely place on Earth, and being so is an example of geographical imagination and the idea of becoming. And here, the text which describes it is turning into the plane of immanence, to quote Giles Deleuze and Felix Guattari, because it actually situates the passage from our sense of being to our sense of becoming, and which is actually the key point in a science fiction. And this is actually, Dunglungdo is actually the last frontier of the primitive world, where a dragon, a roc, a giant bird of Sinbad's tale, a griffin, a nork, a fang, or even a phoenix are the reality. We know that these are all pigments of imagination, but the text is actually turning into the direction for use to make us familiar with the sense of nowhereness that the text is trying to pose upon us. And in this way, science fiction in general, they actually depict non-place in literature in the most faithful manner possible. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for this wonderful presentation. The fact that Shotyajit Rai and one of his popular creation can be interpreted along the lines of geocriticism is simply remarkable. I mean, the way you distinguish between place and non-place and has been truly remarkable. With that, I now formally open the session for questions and discussions. Can we have questions? Yes. I'd like to have certain questions on the paper because it has been a fascinating paper. It should definitely evoke a response from the audience.
I'm actually, there is a question, perhaps.
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes, sir. Should I read it out? Should I read it out for you, sir?
Yes. Please read out. Please read.
Okay. This is from Gayatri Verma U. She says, could you please elaborate on the differences between place and space?
Okay. So there is a huge gap between the two terms, space and place, in the sphere of humanistic geography. For example, when Waifu Tuan, the famous Chinese-American humanistic geographer, he wrote the book Space and Place, the experiential perspective. He actually wanted to propound the idea that space is the whole world. It is actually the undefined territory. It is actually the territory in the sphere of geography. It is the undefined territory. The whole earth may be a space. Okay. Now, it becomes a place when we attach our emotion, attach our feeling, or we provide meaning to the meaninglessness that space actually poses upon us. From that point of view, place is basically the experiential idea of space. Space is actually meaningless, and when we provide it meaning, it becomes a place. Okay. For example, we tend to name a particular space, and whenever the name is given, the undefined territory called space turns into place. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. There is also another one by Richa Sharma, and she asked, please elaborate on how place is a constellation of human relation. Isn't place should be something where an individual belongs, irrespective of relations that one forms during lifetime?
Okay. Now, space actually, literally, these two terms, as we know, space and time, they have little difference. But when we foray into the territory of humanistic geography or we foray into the territory of geocriticism, the terms actually become contradictory to each other. Now, we actually think of our social space, we think of our personal space, and we use the word space. But when we actually think from the perspective of humanistic geography, space is something that is not very important, because literature, according to humanistic geography and geocriticism, it actually deals with place, because place is the living space itself. Okay, and here lies the difference. And from our general understanding, it may sound here or peculiar, but it is there in the sphere of humanistic geography. Interesting.
Okay, sir, there is also another one. Could you please comment on the landscape in children's literature, especially Indian literature, in relation to Indian literature?
Okay. Now, children's literature, it actually tries to look at landscape from the point of view of children's understanding of space. Now, Timasini once famously said, there are two ways we can look upon a particular place. The one is literate and conscious, and other is illiterate and unconscious. So when we actually go through children's literature, then it actually resides in the murky territory between the literate and conscious idea of space and the illiterate and unconscious idea of space. Because innocent understanding of the world is the key word in children's literature. But interestingly, children's literature is being written by an adult, and the adult is trying to understand the landscape in terms of a little boy or a little girl. And from that point of view, children's literature is often full of fantastical or romantic geography, because it is actually the idea of imagination that actually guides the understanding of landscape in the mind of a little boy or a little girl. That is it.
Thank you, sir. I don't think there is also another one. I think you have already answered the question, the difference between place and space. Same question I think has been asked by Niranjan Mongal. And if we don't have any question, I would formally end this session. Now, before I go into the next session, I have a small announcement to make. The fact is that we'll be going for parallel sessions. And thank you, sir. Thank you for being a part of this webinar. And as I was saying, we'll be going for parallel sessions. And there are three sessions, technical session 4, technical session 5, and technical session 6.
Rigda.
Yes.
In the chat box, there is a question by Subhodip Jana.
Sorry, I think I missed it.
No, just
Okay.
he typed it now.
Could you take another one, sir? Another one. I think Shubhadeep Jana has asked this question.
Okay.
Will it be possible for you? Okay. How the idea of becoming on Earth can be used in films without violating its actual meaning / differences?
Let me.
Yes.
How
Shubhadeep Jana has
the idea
asked.
of becoming on Earth can be used in films without violating its actual meaning and differences. Actually, science fiction, according to Deleuze and Guattari, or according to other critics also, science fiction is not about the idea of being. Because when we are actually going through a realistic documentation of our society in the form of literature, we deal with what happens. But when we uh, go through a book that is actually a science fiction, we actually encounter the idea of chaos, because what is happening in the world of science fiction is the fantastical one. It's something that is not really in the domain of our idea of consistency on it. And from that point of view, if we actually uh, watch a movie based upon futuristic ideas, we actually try to have a kind of notion of what is going to happen in future. Okay. For example, if we actually uh, watch a movie like Avatar or something like that, we actually try to understand the future. But those are some possibilities, and we are in the process of becoming that. But it is against the idea of being on Earth. And here lies the basic difference between science fiction and fiction in general, or a realistic portrayal in the world of cinema, and the futuristic ideas that are presented in the world of cinema.
Thank you, sir. Thank you once again. I think with that we can safely conclude this particular session. And as I was saying, I have a slight announcement to make. We'll be going for a panel session, and as far as technical session 4 and 5 are concerned, the paper presenters who are associated with technical session 4 and 5, they have to remain in the present link and present the papers. And those who are part of technical session 6, a separate link I think has been emailed to them. They have to use that particular link to join that particular session. And I request Mr. Sanjay Das, Assistant Professor of English of Subarnarekha Mahavidyalaya, to kindly coordinate that particular session by introducing Dr. Devdas Roy, Associate Professor, to the audience. And
Okay, thank you. I'm leaving now and joining the parallel session 6.
thank you.
Thank you.
Rick Babu, the link for the parallel session has already been put into the chat box.
Yes, I think I have mentioned that. Okay.
The link has already been shared in the chat box.
Yes, the link is also being provided in the chat box. So I would request the participants who are associated with technical session 6 to kindly use that link to join the session, which is going to be chaired by Dr. Devdas Roy, and the program coordinator for that particular session is Mr. Sanjay Das, Assistant Professor of Subarnarekha Mahavidyalaya. Now, with that, we would begin technical session 4. And the chairperson for technical session 4 is Dr. Gautam Buddha Shural. Before I request Dr. Gautam Buddha Shural to chair the session, let me say a few words about Professor Shural. Dr. Gautam Buddha Shural, Professor, Department of English, Bankura University, has been in teaching since 1990. He started his teaching career in Khatra Adivashi Mahavidyalaya, Bankura, while he joined as a lecturer in the Department of English in June 1990. In the same year, on 1st November, he joined Bankura Christian College as a lecturer in the Department of English, where he subsequently became associate professor and head of the PG Department of English. He went to Bristol University, UK in 2006 as a visiting fellow. He joined the Department of English with Dashaguri University with Nagpur as professor in 2008. A year later in 2009, he came back to his old college and continued to teach there until July 2015. He joined Bankura University as a professor of English in August 2015. He is the author of a book on Hopkins and pre-Africanism and has edited 4 books on tribal life. He has presented papers in various conferences and seminars, and a number of his papers have been published in different national and international journals and books. His areas of interest are Victorian poetry, Indian English literature, and tribal and Dalit studies. With that, I formally introduce Dr. Gautam Buddha Shunal to chair the technical session 4, and I request all the participants to be present with their papers.
Thank you very much. And I think I'm audible.
Yes, sir. You are audible.
So,
Sir, is
thank
it
you.
possible to open the video?
Yes. Actually, I have some issues with my computer, so I will be resolving it soon, and then I will be opening my video definitely. For the timing, I am actually joining from my mobile, so that is the issue. Anyway, I am switching on my video also, right? Just 1 minute. Yes, am I visible?
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So actually, I thank the 2 colleges who are organizing this seminar, and I have been in communication with Sumit for a long time. So without wasting any more time, because I know that there are a number of paper presenters, I think 7 in this session. And yes, and the time slot for each one is just 5 minutes. So this is really a short time for the paper presenters. But I would request
Yes, sir. This setting is perfect, sir. This setting is perfect.
Okay. So I would request the paper presenters to actually stick to the time and finish their presentation within 5 minutes, so that we can go by the time schedule, right? So, should I?
With your permission, can I call the first paper presenters?
Yes. Sure.
Okay. Sure. The first one is Deshin Dolkar Bhutia, research scholar, Department of English, SRM University, Sikkim, and the title of his paper is Unmaking of Convents, Exploring Room Gardens, Black Narcissus through Cultural Geography. You may go ahead.
Yes. So, Deshin Dolkar, please present your paper.
Okay, I hope my screen is visible to everyone.
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. Good evening to one and all present here. Without wasting much time, I would like to begin with my presentation with and the title of my presentation is Unmaking of Convents, Exploring Room Gardens, Black Narcissus Through Cultural Geography. So in this presentation, I'm using the framework of cultural geography, as it is the field of study that concentrates upon the ways in which space, place, and environment participate in an unfolding dialogue of meaning, and Rumo Gordon's Black Narcissus extensively centers around these themes, like, for example, the construction of convents at marginalized spaces, or the kind of effect a certain place or a certain environment has on its people. So when there was a topographical shift of the imperial gaze from the plains to the hills, I would like to quote Dane Kennedy here, what they saw was what their heritage had taught them to see, and the picturesque representation of the hills evoked in every British a memory of their homeland, and it was this emotion that they wanted to create on these mountain spaces. spaces. However, unfamiliar topography and cultural terrain as presented in Gordon's location of the Eastern Himalayas not only goes on to examine mountain as spaces that is marginalized in the colonial imaginary, but it also goes on to re-signify the purpose of a convent altogether. So the establishments of convents in the colonial era were marked as sites of domination and symbol of colonial power that was very instrumental in bringing the people under the control of the empire. However, setting up of convents at high spaces kind of challenge or question this entire definition of space and its territorial ownership. So here the landscape place serves as a key location for exploring identity. In the case like the first mission of the nuns here is to convert the palace that housed women, which is also called as the House of Women, into a convent and name it as Saint Faith. And also in the landscape, we see that the people are experiencing certain kind of isolation because the kind of spaces that they encounter with that is characterized by, let's say, rainfall or wind that keeps penetrating to each and every corner of the palace, or the mist, or even some resistance from the natives. Another is natives' awkwardness with modernity as offered by the missionaries, also kind of proved to be an obstacle in a proper setup of a convent in the high places, because according to the natives, they thought that the missionaries would ultimately eat into the countryside and want to know everything and alter everything. This I'm quoting from Black Narcissus itself. So talking of location, the location that has been used here is that of Darjeeling, and Darjeeling is seen as spaces of recuperation and recreation even till today. And oftentimes because of this, it leads to its exoticization and marginalization. So what happens is when we are romanticizing a place too much, it often leads to the marginalization of its problem. Like for example, if we take Darjeeling into consideration, and if we don't just look at it from the romantic point of view, and if we see that actual lived experiences of the place that gets overshadowed, we see that Darjeeling and other mountain towns are characterized by heavy rainfall during monsoon seasons, and this rainfall often leads to landslide, and then this landslide causes damage to property, and at the most it even takes the life of people. And the kind of water scarcity that we see in all these mountain towns are also a very recurrent problem of the mountains that gets overshadowed because a place is being romanticized too much. People standing in lines to get water, or the kind of water that is available to people on an alternate basis, and to some extent for consumption, people even have to buy water. So when you are romanticizing a place by, let's say, calling it as the Queen of the Hills, or calling any other mountain towns and saying that it fits into the space of the aesthetic of the picturesque, we are unknowingly marginalizing its problem. So in this context, we can see that there is a disruption of the dominant course of the civilizing mission which flourished in the colonial sites.
So thank you. I think you have completed your presentation. Is it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Now with this, I had one more.
Okay. Please.
You can continue for another minute.
Okay, so I'm also using this kind of behavioral geography that centers around human decision making, and the resultant spatial behavior is very important to understand various emotive responses of fear, thrill, adventure that is triggered by the mountains on the people. And here especially the nuns who begin to falter in their mission of civilizing the uncivilized and the underdeveloped, and the effect of the mountains can be seen on the psychology of the nuns also. Like some of the nuns falter in their mission, because of the presence of Kanchenjunga, they are gazing at Kanchenjunga so much that they forget to do their duties, and as a result some of them commit apostasy, some of them and try to think about their life as their life before they became a nun. And all this happens because they are presented in a landscape that is experiencing continuous loneliness and also sexual obsession. And finally, the subjectiveness of the nuns gets re-signified by the terrain, and the nuns who initially stray and struggle with their utilitarian ideology eventually flee their mission and retreat from the mountains. Thank you.
Sir, kindly unmute yourself. Your audio is muted. Yeah. Kindly unmute. Thank you, sir. Thank you. And next we have Shahidur Rahman Laskar, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Vidyanagar College, Kolkata. And the title of his paper is Navigating Multidimensional Spaces Embedded with Philosophical Definitions and Significations, Reading Mamang Dai's Poems in the Epoch of Space. You may begin.
Thank you, Rick. With due respect to the distinguished chairperson and my friend coordinator, Rick, I want to begin my paper. Spatial turn has provided us some radical ways to read the interstices in the relationship between human beings and geographical sites in and off the literary text in the context of psychological effects. We need to define space and place in their unfossilized forms in the heterogeneous extension of meaning, in sharp contrast to what Newton, Descartes, Kant, and other philosophers have postulated in their truncated notion. So Isaac Newton proclaimed that, I quote, space, spatially an absolute, independent, infinite, eternally fixed, uniform container into which God placed the material universe at the moment of creation. It is a sheer biblical observation of him, obviously. We should move from this definition of Newton since it is ordained, uncontested, and absolute. Philosophers of the spatial turn have unboxed multidimensional perspectives of space, place, and their orientation in the literary understandings. So what I will do later, without doing or dealing with the definitions of what the current philosophers have said regarding space, place, and topographical definitions, I want to deal with the text and textual analysis. Mamang Dai is a Northeast Indian writer from the Adi tribal community of Arunachal Pradesh. She is a writer with checkered identities. She is a journalist, a nature activist, a poet, a novelist, and a fine storyteller of myths and folklores. She was an IAS, but left the job to pursue a career in journalism and writing. Through her poetic world, Dai has represented the different terrains of cartographical journey, as Robert Titali puts it, in her hometown, Pasighat, and her state Arunachal Pradesh with the help of literary symbols. For the present paper, I have chosen a few selected pieces of her poems, which are Small Towns and the River, The Voice of the Mountain, Island, and An Obscure Place. What gives the poems of Mamang Dai a quintessential feature is her operating the key topographical elements and her poetic attachment with them. The physical place takes a psychological representation of the small towns in the Small Towns and the River. She is conscious of her hometown Pasighat and tries to feel cartographical contours of the place by the poetic imagination. Here I quote from the text, small towns always remind me of death. In summer or winter, with the dust flying or the wind howling down the gorge. The poem showcases of situatedness and emplacement in her hometown. The river has a soul. Dai and her Adi community have such an umbilical affinity features that they even believe in animism. I quote from the poem in the same poem. In the summer, it cuts through the land, the immortality of water. Let me see. Yeah, the river has a soul. In the summer, it cuts through the land like a torrent of grief. Sometimes I think of it holds breath seeking a land of fish and stars. The river has a soul, it knows, stretching past the town, from the first drop of rain to dry earth and meets on the mountain tops. The river knows the immortality of water. The rivers cutting through the land and stretching past the town and its subsequent activities refer to the spatial extension of the river and its impact on the lives of the said tribal community. Spatial theory actually talks of the text and of the text, without advocating structuralist linguistic approach of the text itself. Here I must mention Pavel's coinage of the term textolatry, what the structuralists fixation with text, Thomas Pavel's textolatry, the real spatial belongingness and the imaginary connectedness of the poet with the landscape, which Mamangdai wants to build up in her poem. Small towns grow with anxiety for the future. We can see echoes of this line in the poem, The Voice of the Mountain. We live in the territories forever ancient and new, and as we speak in changing languages. The near future is ushering a gloom in the community, a transformation, translation, change of culture and language by the capitalist cruel desire for monetary expansion at the cost of cultural and topographical changes. This wreaks havoc to the poet and her Adi tribal community. Frederick Jameson in his Poetical Unconscious has explicated that one must have the awareness of what it means to be in the world. There is something truly terrifying, or at least frustrating, in being lost. Through the poetry and the cognitive mapping, Mamangdai tries to project what it means to situate oneself at a particular place. In Heidegger's view, the experience of being in the world is occasioned by an intense anxiety and a sense of uncanny. The uncanny in German actually suggests an unhomeliness. Heidegger suggests that the feeling of anxiety is fundamentally a sense of not being at home in the world due to the constant change and transformation of the regional culture and space of the tribal community. A looming anxiety really persists. In The Voice of the mountain has such mammoth space with so varied roles to perform. It knows the town's, the estuary mouth, I quote, the town's estuary mouth, there beyond the last bank where the color drains heaven. I can outline the chapters of the world. The mountain has such a vastness of...
Sorry to interrupt, Shaibu, but kindly sum up.
Okay. The mountain has such a transcendental visionary space to witness everything from the time immemorial. The spatial vastness of the mountain delimits the historical time. The poetry of Mamangdai is heterotopia, as Foucault opined in his lecture of Other Spaces. It is a place to be against the non-place. By composing verses, Dai explores, seeks, surveys, digs into, reads, and writes a place, as Westphal verily placed it in the book Geocritical Explorations. The term explore suits the spatial term better because no meaning in today's context is fixed. Dai fulfills the desires by writing about place in poems and non-fictions by her literary cartographical explorations. And in her interview with Arundhati Subramaniam, while asked regarding Mamangdai's approach to poetry, Dai said that my poetry, my take is an effort to create an inner space, a meeting place of the self and that other reality within the limitation of worlds. And Mamangdai herself said that writing itself is a protest. It is to find out a place in my writing. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rick, and the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Shaibu Roman Laskar.
Yes, thanks.
Next, we have a joint presentation, if I'm not wrong. Richa Sharma.
Yes, sir.
University Fellow, Center for Language Learning, the North Cap University, Gurugram. And Dr. Shrutimita Mehta, Associate Professor, Center for Language Learning, the North Cap University, Gurugram. And the title of their paper is Raji, an Ancient Epic, Recreating Mythological Space Through Simulated Veracity. You may begin.
Yes, sir. Hello, everyone. So just let me share my screen. Sir, I hope the screen is visible.
Yes, please go.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. So thank you for introducing my topic, Razi, an ancient epic, recreating mythological space through simulated veracity. To associate myths with computer games may sound nonsense as a random connection between two concepts that loosely stand together. These two concepts seem separated not only by time or space but by the very nature of human societies, the societies that created them. Myth has an indescribable ubiquity and a propensity of exhibiting itself substantially in an individual's routine life in form of customs, visions, norms, rituals, spiritual dogmas, etc. Retellings of and pragmatic studies on mythical stories and mythical characters have become a new field of exploration. Myth has found its place in various unthinkable dimensions of contemporary social culture, and one of them being video game, which is a form of digital entertainment and cyber reality may. Contemporary video games are not demarcated within the confines of entertainment and fun. They also provide a social and cultural space that is not sternly delineated by the length and framework of the game. So, in the postmodern era, when the world rests on the virtual reality and the intermingling of cultures, this bricolage of supposed high culture and low culture finds a perfect reflection in how mythology and myth are interwoven with video games. My paper attempts to highlight the contemporary postmodern approaches which focus on holistic study of games, espousing theories that incorporate both ludologists' mechanical as well as narrativists' symbolic illustrations. The focal interest of my paper would be to calculate the social and cultural facets of online games and observe their role in propagation of myth and its interpretation and transformation. So, for my paper, I would like to elaborate on one of the video games which has been built around the Indian mythology, Razi, an ancient epic. So, it is an adventure video game which was developed by Nodding Heads Games, which is based in Pune, Maharashtra. So, the game is set in ancient India and it follows the story of a young girl named Razi who lives a very simple life. She works as a circus performer alongside her beloved younger brother named Golu. So it's not known to her that she has been chosen by the god to stand against the demonic invasion of the human realm. So, seeking to avenge their defeat in the last great war from 1,000 years ago, the demons have challenged the gods who humiliated them once. So, determined to rescue Golu, her brother Raji prays to Durga, goddess of war. The goddess hears her plea and grants her the sacred weapon Trishul and charges her with saving the children and defeating the main villain who is Mahabalasur. So the game is one of the first video games that really take a deep dive into showcase the beautiful world of Hindu mythology and Indian history. Action adventure title Raji is narrated by the deities Durga and Vishnu and features gods and demons in the art throughout the game. It incorporates Hindu mythology and takes inspiration from history texts such as Mahabharata and Ramayana epics. Graphically, the game is designed in the style of Pahari paintings, and the in-game architecture is modeled after that of medieval Rajasthan. The world of Raji is varied with mystical environments and ancient Indian art that tell the story. From the authentic puppetry cutscenes and demons designs to elaborate murals, the story plays out with primordial energy of the Indian gods from Shakti, the legend of Garuda, and more. The world of Raji is one of the fewer games which has a female protagonist. The player gets an acquainted with of different mythological stories as the game progresses. The cultural identification of the Indian players with the characters play a role in bridging the gap between the virtual world and the real space. I have discovered that the myths are the most transparent at the textual level of the video games, as the narrative structures behind the game closely mirrors those of the other more traditional forms of media. Razi, for example, chose to tackle with the idea of hero destined to save a condemned world. Myths can be identified to a certain degree at any level of the video game, according to how deep the analyst chooses to delve into the details. To a certain extent, even the level design and the overall design of the game can reflect myths. Raji includes initiatory patterns that are significant of the avatar as well as for the player himself. And all the game elements are organized around this initiatory skeleton. I believe that there is a fundamental myth that transcends all video games, and that is the myth of creation. Each video game, in fact, is a way to represent the already created space, the space of reality, or in some way to recreate that space. Of course, the freshly shaped reality is filtered through the experience of the new creators and cannot encompass all the dimensions of the divine world. The player himself recreates the game space, the game universe, by
Sorry to interrupt, but we
interpreting.
need to wind up. Okay.
Yes, sir, this is my last line. The player himself recreates the game universe or the game space by reinterpreting it through their own vision, which need not necessarily be perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Richa Sharma and Dr. Shrutimita Mehta, for this wonderful take on mythology. Next up, we have Mridul Simrinal. Is he there? Mridul Simrinal?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, kindly make yourself visible in that case. Okay,
So
and
right
yes.
now I'm experiencing some technical glitches on my camera. So I'm trying
Okay,
to. I'm
fine.
trying to.
Just present the paper, and the title of the paper is Mapping the Geography of Kerala, Romantic Description of Nature in Arundhati Roy's God of Small Things. Go ahead.
Okay. Hello everyone. Myself Mridul Simranal, and the title of my paper is Mapping the Geography of Kerala: Romantic Description of Nature in Arundhati Roy's God of Small Things. So as we all know, the text has been subjected to several discourses. You have a lot of discourses from different perspectives. You have the gender discourses. You have the eco-critical discourses, but seldom you have the a discourse from the cultural geographical perspective, and the reason can be identified as the lack of knowledge on the cultural history of the region, and the cultural existence, the cultural elements that is has been through in that region for a lot of years. The all story is based on a family from Ayamanam in Kottayam district of Kerala. So thinking of Kerala, you know that it is very famous for tourism, backwaters, houseboats, etc. And it is often branded as one of the tropical havens, tropical paradise of India, as a holiday destination. And if you consider the geography of Kerala, you have the high standing Western Ghats, where you have a lot of specialities. It is even older than the Himalayas, and you have the 44 rivers flowing from originating from Western Ghats. So in Arundhati Roy's God of Small Things, I think there is also a lot of autobiographical elements which are portrayed in Arundhati Roy's God of Small Things. Especially she's also of partial Bengali descent, also from Kerala. Her mother is from Kerala, Mary Roy. Here, the geography is an aspect which can be seen. It is embedded in the fiction and poetry alike, but it is seldom, visible in fiction. So in Arundhati Roy's God of Small Things, you have a lot of elements which 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 can portray the cultural geography of Kerala, and also it can reflect the socio-cultural elements, especially the social divide between the Syrian Christians and the Dalit Christians in Kerala, and also the several aspects such as the political aspects of the communism, and as also the long-standing Congress communist divide between the political landscape. Here I'm trying to omit some of the important points, so I can stick to the time constraint due to the time constraint. And the tropical geography of Kerala forms the backdrop during the course of actions in the novel. Especially in the last chapter, you can see the union of Ammu and Velutta, where the river is the the witness, and the river, which is actually Meenachilar, which is originating from the Western Ghats and flows into the Arabian Sea. It has been often called as the the bearer of the cultures in Kottayam district or the Kottayam region of Kerala. And here you can also have the a uh, a kind of opportunity to read eco-feministic perspective. I'm not going into that. And the topography and climate of Kerala is an integral part in the character development, especially with Ammu and the river. You can have a lot of comparison with that. And so the nature is establishing itself as a space where the lives of the characters are centered. The heat of Kerala, the tropical heat of Kerala, is evident, especially if you see there's a instant in the novel where they are waiting in one of the level crows in Ernakulam, and she is beautifully expressing the summer heat of Kerala, and also the monsoon of Kerala. So without much consuming time, I would like to conclude that despite being subjected to various discourses from different perspective, the cultural geography of Kerala is seldom depicted in it's seldom discussed in God of Small Things, and nature is establishing itself as an important space through various aspects. There are a lot of things that are embedded in my paper, because due to the time constraint, I'm limiting myself to some of the important points. Thank you.
Thank you, Mridul Singh Mrinal. Thank you for maintaining time. Next up, we have Suchitra S. PhD Research Scholar, Department of English, University College, Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala. And the title of his paper is The Politics of Spatial Structures in Prayag Akbar's Lala. Is Suchitra S. available?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Thank you for the introduction. Sorry, sir?
Yes, go on. You can present your paper.
Okay, sir. The title of my paper goes, The Politics of Spatial Structures in Prayag Akbar's Laila. This is set in a dystopian landscape, which is not very far from the present time. Here the parameters of space and time are pushed further into the future. But the events are so much happening now, particularly in the Indian milieu. Here the dystopia operates through the hegemony of community and caste and the aggressive policies of segregation on the basis of purity. And in the novel, the nation is portrayed as it is in decline, and clean air, potable water, and security are at a premium. Climate change and crumbling infrastructure make life in this nation a challenge for all, but the most privileged. And the city in the novel is ravaged by the armed scrutiny of a loose band of men named as repeaters, who are actually the saviors of a pure community who work for the council, who are the rulers of the nation. And these repeaters make sure that the localities remain self-inclusive. The society depicted in the novel makes constant efforts to build more and more boundaries between caste, class, and gender. The narrative thus offers many nuances on what constitutes privilege and the layers of gray underneath it. Indian society deludes itself that caste discrimination is a thing of the past. Yet it suffuses the nation from top to bottom. The varied and contingent nature of caste has not prevented attempts at a unified conception. Some model caste in terms of three key effects like social separation, graded status, and occupational specialization. And you have other dimensions of caste too, like you have a hereditary dimension which comes from caste as endogamous skin groups like we call jadis, or restrictions on marriages or diet, for example vegetarianism. Then we have another dimension of caste, that is economic dimension, where caste is divided on based on occupations with ascribed status. And in its political dimension, caste constitutes systems of dominance and rule at local and regional levels. Finally, caste has also an ideological dimension, which is associated, for example, with ideas of purity and impurity, which is the most influential theorization of caste. The locale of the novel is an unnamed city, which is crisscrossed by fly roads, from which cars descend only to make their way into gated sectors or gated communities protected by unscalable high walls. The sectors are strictly segregated by caste and community, named like the Tamil Brahmin sector, Bora Muslim zone, Catholic Commons, Sharif Muslimin precinct, and the list goes on. So this is a world in which all the possible divisions of caste, religion, and class have been publicly embraced, where each high identity zealously guarded and physically engraved into city's architecture. Here in this novel, caste is not a static pyramid, but it becomes a dynamic social organization. In the novel, Leila, the main protagonist is Shalini, who is an elite, well-to-do woman who marries a man from a different religion named Rizwan. In the dystopian universe portrayed in the novel, segregation is the only constitution. The privileged live in walled cities that are categorized by community, religion, or caste. The elite prize here is purity, which is an abstract form of political identity that they claim, preserve, and extract through the militant violence of men known as repeaters. After Shalini got married with Riz, they shift to a society for mixed couples, and there she gives birth to their daughter, Leila. On her third birthday, however, Leila disappears in the midst of a raid, which also results in her husband's death. In the aftermath, Shalini is ostracized to the Towers, which is actually a purity camp that is named as Towers, and it is designed to resist state obedience to the social rebels, whom they call as social rebels, these Shalini and Rizwan, who doesn't obey these walls and who doesn't obey the council's instructions. And the spatial structures that are portrayed in the novel, such as walls, towers, purity camp, and gated communities, all these reflects the ingrained segmentation that functions in our society. These spatial structures are invariably political in its construction and functioning. Thus, the novel weaves together various strands of inequality still zealously followed in our society. It depicts how these spatial structures utilize the matrices of caste, class, religion, and gender to create a society to their advantage and to mold its citizens as mere puppets. It is about, to put in simple terms, a totalitarian regime.
Sorry to interrupt, but you need to wind up, okay?
Okay. So here I attempted to show how the spatial structures in the novel augments the segregation which is structured by the establishment in order to exercise their power and the strategies adopted to employ them. Thank you.
Thank you, Sujitra Sivan. And next we have Shreyoshi Roy. Next we have Shreyoshi Roy, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Kharagpur College. And the title of the paper is Representation of Place and Human Bond, a reading of Kunal Basu's The Japanese Wife. You may proceed.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Am I properly audible and visible?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you, sir. So my paper, Representation of Place and Human Bond, a reading of Kunal Basu's The Japanese Wife, aims to focus on two aspects. First, human bond, that is love and deep emotions that can transcend any geographical, cultural, and linguistic barrier. So, most importantly, it maps out the geography of human heart. And the second one is place. Geography or local, land and people. Uh, Indian English short story, in particular, is scaling a new height, offering a wider scope for critical acclaims. Among the commendable short story writers in India, the latest one to achieve an international limelight is Kunal Basu. He is the author of some acclaimed novels such as The Opium Clerk, The Miniaturist, The Races, and The Japanese Wife, comprising 12 short stories in which the title story is The Japanese Wife. And the entire collection was published in 2008. The Japanese Wife is a phenomenal love story as Basu has drawn two individuals from two corners of the globe, geographically and culturally separate, who come together for a bonding of lifetime in the most unique way possible. The Japanese Wife depicts the relationship of Snehoma Chakraborty, a teacher at Shunai's secondary school, and a Japanese woman, Miyagi. Being pen friends, Snehomoy and Miyagi share their joys and sorrow, worries and anxieties, and very soon this pen friendship turns into a pen marriage. Unhindered by the great distance and cultural differences between them, Snehomoy and Miyagi are bound for life, leading a normal everyday relationship between married couples. 20 years elapse, and the passage of time has only made their bonding stronger. The Pain marriage no longer remains a secret to the villagers and even outside of the island. On reaching, one would ask to be shown the house of a certain Master Moshai, the one with Japanese wife. The location of Shunai Island is beside Matla River. Matla forms a wide estuary in and around the Sundarbans in South 24 Parganas district. Cyclones, monsoons, and storms frequently visits the island, forcing its inhabitants to constantly build and rebuild their lives. Snehomoy's parents drowned in the Matla. In one of his letters to Miyagi, he expresses his deep sorrow and malice towards Matla and also shares the bountiful nature of the river soon after the monsoon is over. Snehomoy, living 3 years in Calcutta, never finds any ease in the urban way of life. Rather, his own rustic island in the side of Matla provides him solace, serenity, and comfort. He is ordinary but happy school teacher of an infamous island. Life is very difficult in this isolated territory, far away from the center. But it gives them the strength and courage to dream, to fight, and to survive. The islanders know how to satiate their life. Their life revolves around mangroves on the banks, the submerged jetties, and flood warnings posted on the ferry terminals. Still, the peasant women return with a smiling face from fields with huge stacks of hay, bullock carts piled high with rice sacks, and the postman carefully collects and distributes letters parcelled crossing the turbulent Matla. Here, Basu portrays the everyday action of the inhabitants of the islanders. After the death of his parents, Snehomoy has been brought up by an widow aunt, an affectionate, caring, and selfless lady. Each and every character in Shunai Island put a smile on their face as if they found happiness in the acceptance only. As I have already given a brief discussion about the Shunai Island, now I will try to quote from Waifu Tuan, who claims that space turns into place as we get to know it better and endow it with value. Therefore, place is a meaningful understanding of environment. Edward Ralph broadly has the same idea as Tuan. In his work, Ralph tries to maintain the relation between space and place and not present them as separated concepts. Because the quality of place is that it has the power to order and to focus human intentions, experiences, and actions spatially. So, space and place are dialectically structured in human environmental experiences, since our understanding of space is related to places we inhabit, which in turn derive meaning from their spatial context.
Sorry to interrupt, but you need this. Okay.
Yes, sir. Therefore, the people of Shonai Island have grown accustomed to the region's stability and fluidity, which is reflected in their understanding of the space and expressed through the narratives which revolve around the place they inhabit. Here again, I want to get back to the point of human bond in connection with the place. As I have mentioned about a widow aunt who reared up Snehomoy, she has also provided a shelter to another widow with his son. And aunt implores Snehomoy to take the responsibility of the fatherless boy. Basu portrays an intense and selfless human bond far away from the mainland. Aunt's unconditional love and support may enable Snehomoy to remain loyal to his unseen Japanese wife. His heart aches due to the distance and he promises silently, "Wait for me. In the end, I will come to you, floating down this river." This profound love and patience between the two unknown souls from two different parts of the globe also refers to the union of the rustic world of Shonai Island of India and Japan. The place that has been estranged from mainland by Matla River also gives a different identity. Their innocence is preserved by their land and the river. It provides a magnanimous status to the villagers who combat against all hurdles, disappointments, agony, and know how to accept and embrace. And thank you very much for listening me and bear with me.
Thank you, Sreshya, for this wonderful take on Kunal Basu's The Japanese Wife. We'll be getting back to you at the end of the session. Now, next up, we have Shondip Malai, if I'm not wrong. Okay. Assistant Professor, Haflong Government College, Assam. And the title of his paper is Spirit of Place and Sense of Acceptance in Anjum Hassan's Lunatic in My Head. You may proceed.
Am I audible, sir?
You're audible.
Good evening, everyone. The title of my paper is Spirit of Place and Sense of Acceptance in Anjum Hassan's Lunatic in My Head. So I begin my presentation with quote unquote, quote unquote said by Petzel M. Petzel, where he says that it is if a place's characteristics are homogenized, its spirit of place is likely to change drastically. So this is what we find in the novel here, written by Anjum Hassan. So in the novel is all about the division between migrant and the local people residing here, and the invisible line that is dividing them there. So there, all the characters cherish and proudly associate with their spirit of place associated with them. In doing so, they justify their belongingness towards their place, despite not recognized by other group with the line dividing them. Their spirit of place is strong, but many consider it to be the only form of a kind of elevated existence, where the living ideals of the place, such as ethics, codes, mores, social values of the place, are considered to be the ideal way of their existence. The sense of acceptance is natural upon where beautiful setting of the novel has been set. It is set in the hill station of Shillong. So it has, with this beautiful, several descriptions are mentioned, which are characteristic of the place. That includes the cloudy weather of the place, all being a part of the place, as well as the golden colored sunlight. They're used, and it becomes a part of the identity and acceptance of themselves. For the place itself is the novel, and the very title of the novel itself, Lunatic in My Head, has also been taken from a song by a Western pop band called Pink Floyd, which describes the place because it is obsession of the young people of the place with Western music. So what he is, I'd like to describe about the novel, speak about the situation. In the novel, Anjum Hassan's Lunatic in My Head, it explores how monotonous existence, rationalized with a feeling of natural belongingness, brought about by the serenity of the surrealism of the dramatic backdrop of the hill station town, doesn't seem to let go of its charm by any means, the locational setting itself being the main character that shapes the three main characters and their daily life, consciousness, and the future ahead. Despite being shaded as non-natives, the sensibility of existence interfused with the geography of the location probes enduring and vigorous to the three main characters here. Those are Aman Mondi, Sophie Das, and Firdaus Ansari. But it is to be mentioned that the place itself, the hill station town of Shillong, where it is set, itself itself is a part of the novel, and so can be considered a huge and an important a point in the, we can say, as a sort of character, a character in the novel. So it is in fact a sense of great discovery and reassurance to them how the locational setting, despite forces of socio-political ethos, frequently trying to dissociate them from it, doesn't let them get away from its grip, and instead binds them together with a sense of a feeling of camaraderie with the place they were born in. Although the hostility of this intimacy comes to a test in the course of time, when political trials and tribulations come towards them, when the difference in political ethos come up. So the locational setting of the novel determines how the existence and identity of the characters also provides them a sense of acceptance, despite them being politically alienated from its location. And it is not just the difference between them. It is not just the difference between, we can say, migrants and locals, or between the dividing line between tribals and non-tribals in the novel. It is also there is the invisible line between the thinker and non-thinkers also come to the place in this novel. So the three main characters in their have in their heads a sense of ordinary lunatic that we all have endowed in us. So the study of, like we can say, the difference in the feeling of being lunatic also determines the three main characters in the novel. Sorry. So with this, I end. Thank you.
Thank you, Shondip. Thank you. Now, with the permission of the chair, I now open the session for discussion. Can you have any questions for the paper presenters? Yes. Because there were many thought-provoking papers, academically insightful papers, and I would definitely expect certain questions. Okay. In that case, I formally conclude the session. I take this opportunity, first of all, to thank Dr. Gautam Buddha Shural for chairing this session, and to all the paper presenters for presenting wonderful papers. And with that, we come to a conclusion, and we'll be starting technical session 5, which is to be chaired by Dr. Snehashish Maiti, Associate Professor, Department of English, Kontai PK College. Yes. Is Sir there? Okay, before I request Dr. Snehashish Maiti to, yes, I can see he's there. Welcome, sir, welcome. Thanks for joining with us. Is there? As I was saying before, I request Dr. Snehashish Maiti to chair the session. Let me say a few words on Dr. Snehashish Maiti. Dr. Snehashish Maiti is an Associate Professor of English, Prabhat Kumar College, Kontai, Purbo Medinipur, West Bengal, affiliated to Vidyasagar University. Yes, I can see you. Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. He has done his doctoral research work on Indian diasporic writers, including Salman Rushdie, Rohindra Mistry, and Bharati Mukherjee. He has also carried out two UGC-sponsored minor research projects on the partition, novels, and Bengali Dalit writers. His publications include his book, The Diasporic Vision, published by LAP, Germany, research articles in a host of journals and translations. He has supervised doctoral theses on Amitabh Ghosh and translation studies. His areas of research interest are Indian English and diasporic writing, post-colonial literature, translation studies, and Sanskrit literature. With that, I welcome Dr. Snehashish Maiti to this particular session, and I request the paper presenters to be present with their papers. And first up, we have Obhrapal, research scholar, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Jodhpur. And the title of a paper is Just This Place, Reading Amitabh Ghosh's The Hungry Tide and Gun Island from Bioregional Perspective. You may proceed.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair Professor. Thank you, conveners and moderator. Please allow me to switch off my camera as I'm facing some internet problem. I will definitely switch it on during the question and answer session. Thank you. Am I, sir, allowed?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Please carry on.
Okay,
yes, go
on. So I have the paper written and I will read from the document. The title of my paper is It's Just This Place, Reading Amitabh Ghosh's The Hungry Tide and Gun Island from Bioregional Perspective. Peter Berg and Raymond Dasman coined the term bioregion in their work, We Inhabiting California, published in 1977. Berg describes it, that means bioregion, as, quote, geographic areas having common characteristics of soil, watershed, climate, native plants, and animals, unquote. And a bioregion refers to both the geographical terrain and the terrain of consciousness to a place and the ideas that have developed about how to live in that place, unquote. So this place conscious perception, quoted by Grunewald in his work published in 2003, of nature has the power to usher in bioregional awareness. Lawrence Buell, in his work Future of the Environmental Criticism, published in 2005, has pointed out that place is an indispensable concept for environmental humanities, and that the concept of the place also gestures in at least three directions at once. These are toward environmental materiality, social perception or construction, and individual effect or bond. These multiple directions make a place an additionally rich and tangled arena for environmental criticism. I quote from Buell, places are centers of place value, quote unquote, to 1977, discrete elastic areas in which setting for the constitution of social relations are located and with which people can identify. Each place is also inseparable from the concrete region in which it is found and defined by physical markers as well as social consensus. Bioregional theorist Jim Dodge explains that the term bioregionalism is formed from Greek bios, meaning life, and the French region from the Latin regia, meaning territory. Thus, the meaning of the word is life territory or place of life. This is quoted from Taylor, published from his article published in 2000, page 67. Bioregionalism as a philosophy urges to gain an intimate and localized knowledge of dwelling in relation to place, biotic and abiotic community, and culture. It engages the inhabitants with the land as an allegiance that entails a commitment to bioregion as a personal habitat, interdependent human community, and sustainable physical environment in cognizance of the interdependencies between one's particular ecosystem and the wider world. So in the next part, I'm skipping the literature survey on Amitabh Ghosh and the theoretical development that I built from bioregionalism and eco-criticism. While developing this theme, I'm directly going to the second section, that the textual analysis and the insights that I have found. So this study aims to merge Amitabh Ghosh's bioregional thinking and the narratives of place represented in his fictional work, The Hungry Tide, published in 2004, and Gun Island, published in 2019. In these two novels, place evolves out of the interplay between humans and the environment, with the environment as a point of reference. Ghosh's narrative of Sundarban bioregion explored the immediate landscape and extend beyond the limits of the bioregion and merge with larger patterns. They connect with what Ursula K. Heise calls, quote, a variety of ecological imaginations of the global. In her Sense of Place and Sense of Planet, The Imagination of Global, published in 2008, page 62. So, in a broader sense, there is a coalition between the local and the global knowledge of the land, redefined or refined to address the environment to a larger scale. This paper particularly studies how Ghosh uses the place as a center of felt value and a filter in these works to appreciate the human-place relationship. It also attempts to reappraise the perception of place attachment from a bioregional perspective. Gillian Tyndall, while examining the role of literary text embedded within a particular oikos and their interaction across space and time, observed, quote, my central concern is not with the actual landscapes and dwellings, but with what these have become in the minds of the novelists and the writers. So I am concerned with the literary uses to which places are put, the meanings they are made to bear, the roles they play, unquote. This is a similar concern of positing literary pieces within ecological spaces that Ghosh articulates in his fictional work. In Hungry Tide and Gun Island, Ghosh shares a relationship that is based on integrative structures. His place stories of Sundarban decimate the binaries. I'm talking about the culture-nature binary and dismantle.
Sorry to interrupt, but you need to wind up. Okay, sorry.
Okay. And the privileges of any one side over the other. So this paves way for a deeper understanding of the planetary ecosystem and a more meaningful integration of the interaction of the place. So I'm just giving some points where I have developed Ghosh's sense of place. First, the mention of the vast mangrove forest. And this is presented as an interconnected parable of landscape, plantscape, non-human animals, and humans. Also, his works encapsulates various themes that are connected to the place, particularly the bioregion, the eco-cultural and historical perspective reflected in the mention of the contest between non-human and the forest dwellers. Also, the various dimensions of the region's historical experience, the acquisition of the land, the setting up of human habitation, the reclaiming the forest, and all these changes, the phase of the bioregion. So all these represent eco-cultural diversity of Sundarban Delta and contribute to reappreciate what human and non-human ecology of the bioregion brings. Ghosh thus presents the story of the mangrove jungle, and also he focused the interdependency of the wasteland, that is the Bada, and the habitation, Abadi. And there is a dominant religious element of the local deities which contributes.
Sorry, but I must ask you to stop.
Okay.
Just one concluding sentence.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Go on.
Yeah. Okay. So, the still practiced belief that are not waned in dominance. So, Ghosh actually, his fictions breathe a bi-regional spirit, what Greg Garrett said in Eco-Criticism, when he reflects about the story of bucket hanging from a tree, and he quotes Wendell Berry. And I won't go for the quotation. I will say that Berry focuses on the accumulation of local soil and local culture and how intimately they are related. So this bi-regional perspective that we I want to show is focusing on the spirit of Ghosh's writing, the accumulation of local soil and local culture. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair Professor, for giving me 2 more minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abra. Though not much time could be provided, you have tried to make your point clear. We shall come back to your paper.
And so, thank you. I really need some insights from you because this is a kind of a part of my postdoctoral project, and this paper is a kind of test run. So whether I'm going on track or I'm off track. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Next, I think, as the schedule provided by the organizers, next is Mr. Animesh Bag, I can see him. Yes. You can go on.
Thank you, sir. A very good evening to all of you. Good evening to Dr. Maiti, respected chair, conveners, and my esteemed other colleagues. Now I'll talk about spatial otherization, post-colonial hinterland, Sundarbans in Amitabh Ghosh's Hungry Tide. I'll try to briefly present my paper. So my paper will explore how the landscape of Sundarbans in Amitabh Ghosh's The Hungry Tide, negotiating its prior typical representation as the spatial other, has been represented as a post-colonial hinterland with its own unique identity. It is sort of heterotopic space that combines a sense of belonging and unbelonging, home and homelessness together. Now, psychoanalytically, hinterland suggests a place beyond visibility, a repressed memory of trauma which could be real or metaphorical, and how the subjugated history of refugee displacement at Maridjapi has also been interspersed in the novel. I would argue claims its own historical identity too. So this is broadly I'll be focusing in my paper. In the spatial ordering, hinterland cartographically appears as the quote-unquote backcountry that lies behind a river shore or refers to coastal area or a region far away from cities. It suggests to an underdeveloped space, mostly conceived as the lack of the urban, privileged cultural capital of the center. Contestably, hinterland stands for fullness as much as for lack. The definition of hinterland appears culturally and metaphorically marked by the bounded concept of city in relation to the fuzzy hybrid idea of hinterland. Such spatial conventionality and its later process of cultural appropriation produces the demarcation between coherent urban and its other non-urban, which needs to be displaced, I think. Now, it is important to remember here the concept of city not as a spatial reality, rather as an ideology too. Now, Sundarbans, called as Vati Desh in Amitabh Ghosh's The Hungry Tide, is that post-colonial hinterland, if I put it so. The land of river, flood, and tiger, geographically remote to the capital of West Bengal, Calcutta. Remember, Calcutta has been used in the actual novel. Now, for its exotic natural landscapes, Sundarbans has been extensively featured in the Bengali literary imagination. However, most of these literary representations stand as the author problematic Bengali Bhadra Samaj ideology that conceives the hinterland Sundarbans as its spatial other. Now, there is a rich archive of vernacular and Anglophone literature based on Sundarbans, and I'll not talk about all those literatures in detail here. Just briefly put, that in between 17th to 19th century, Bengali verse, what is called Puthi literature, region, lower delta region, and like Banabibi, the snake goddess Manasa, and various other local deities who provide a refuge, a psychological sense of safeguard in that hostile, overwhelming environment. In the late 19th century, with the likes of Tolokanath Mukhopadhyay, Domruchorit, or Madan Mohan Takalankar's Bagro, this region becomes the land of fantasy and adventure that an average Bengali middle class Bengali always craved for. So fear was replaced by a spirit of adventure. Now, these narratives represent Sundarban as the space that is typified by loss and struggle, the space that is being conceived through the negation of its center, a sort of Bengali Bhadra Samaj haunting sense of backwardness. What I'm trying to point out here is that what Frederick Jameson might call a spatial analysis of culture, where such cultural appropriation, according to him, and I'm quoting Jameson, symptoms and expression of a new and historically original dilemma, one that involves our insertion as individual subjects into a multidimensional set of radically discontinuous realities. Unquote. Now, Amitabh Ghosh himself is the descent of Bhadra Samaj that somehow has lost the credibility, its grand narrative or grand discursive power in post-independence era, but still a dominant ideology in Bengal. Therefore, the representative voice of the author itself becomes subject of question and reconsideration. However, his association with the Subaltern Studies Project, his drift towards marginal people and obscure lands, as he himself stated in an interview with Chitra Sankaran, suggests that his text would offer a critique of the nation's dominance narrative. Now, in this connection, I think Makran R. Paranjev's one article, Beyond the Subaltern Syndrome, Amitabh Ghosh and the Crisis of Bhadra Samaj, would be important. He mentions that Amitabh Ghosh certainly posits this crisis, but he does not confront them steadfastly, but not by not allowing them fully to develop or escaping into coincidence, doubling, or romanticism. But here I'll differ, because this ambivalent closure of his text, being credulous to subjugated knowledges, I would argue, signifies the fissures of the exclusive signification process of Bhadralok national culture. For this dissented authorial stance, the Hungry-Tide presents a plural, polyphonic view of the world. And notably, Sundarbans in the novel has been depicted from the perspective of the outsider, as well as the local, which I argue sets the binary of the elite Bengali Bhadra Samaj and the rural common folks, only to be disrupted at the end. Let me put 2-3 instances from the text, because time is very short. Now, Kanai is an interpreter and translator, a man from language-centric world where meaning is slippery. However, his initial hesitation to visit Lucivary and uneasiness in the socio-cultural condition suggest his fixity, inability to accommodate with the nature of Sundarbans, which is characterized by constant change and transformation. Nilima Bose, unlike Kanai, is deeply attached to this unsettled place. Leaving Lucivary or moving from this specific space is a sort of betrayal for her, as she always feels connected to its people, her social responsibility for them, and perhaps for her late husband Nilma's memory. Nilima's lived experience, her innate desires and dreams are inscribed by her special sense of belonging, even if that place is hostile. Nirmal, her husband, on the contrary, is the intruder, who believes in utopian revolution, always search in a Bangladeshi refugees. Pia is not similar to Nilima about her idea of home, when she mentioned, for me, home is where the Orsilia are, which reverberates Nilima's words. Home is wherever I can brew a pot of good tea. She always redefines her sense of belonging with every new space and doesn't believe in the fixity of language, much like her shift in life. Let me talk about another character of
you need to finish it, but
yes. Right.
Only a minute. 1 minute.
Yes.
It's
No.
very hard, but
I understand, sir. Yes. Now, let's talk about another character very briefly. Moina, Fokir's wife's sense of belonging to Lucivary is also entrenched in her everyday struggle. Her belongingness can be explained by her desire of abandonment. Home, in other words, in an unending quest. Nilima at the beginning of the end, and for Moina, of the end of the beginning. So the landscape of Sundarbans, which has always been considered as the land of tiger, loss, and hostility, the characters in Sundarbans fails their belongingness, sense of home to that place. Now, I'll not go into too important part of my paper, which focuses on language and the psychoanalytical interpretation. Let me just finish it off with my concluding remarks. So the spatial analysis of culture indicates the dominant ideology put forward by the urban bourgeoisie. In the discursive practice, the spatial backwardness becomes the cultural other to the center. Hinterland eventually stands at the margin of space and history. So Ghosh's Hungry-Tide calls this representational politics in question, and manifests Sundarbans with its adverse living condition could be the space of emotional bonding too. At the end of the story, both outsiders, Pia and Kanai, promise to come back again at Lucivary, suggests the acknowledgement of the sense of belonging that the inhabitants feels to the landscape. The presence of Nirmal's diary even after his death also suggests in this context that the history of this hinterland, although being marginalized, will keep haunting the post-colonial Bengal and its Bhadra Samaj. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. on Inish. It was another engrossing presentation. And once again, it will come back to it at the end of the session. So I now invite Dr. Vikranayan, our third presenter. I hope he is present. Yes. Yes, Dr.
Okay. So am I audible?
Yes, you are. Please proceed.
Okay, so I think I'll begin. The title of the paper is These Stupid Robbers Marginalizing the Local People of the Sundarbans in Bengali Young Adult Fiction. The Sundarbans has a unique history, nature and landscape. It is the largest mangrove forest and the only mangrove tiger land in the world. The area lies southeast of the city of Kolkata in the 24 Parganas district of West Bengal and is part of the Gangetic Delta, which borders on the Bay of Bengal. It is shared between two neighboring countries, Bangladesh and India, being perhaps the only place on earth that is threatened at once by cyclones, tidal waves, lack of fresh water, tigers, crocodiles and poisonous snakes. Early colonial descriptions about the Sundarbans were unsystematic, a jumble of associations, images, notions, ideas, and actual information. Europeans generally saw jungles as hotbeds for deadly tropical diseases and hideouts for leopards and predatory beasts, and the Sundarbans was no exception to this general perspective. We find two major threads running through the British voyagers' accounts of the Sundarban landscape. One, the area is perceived as dangerous, a hotbed of deadly fevers, and a breeding ground for ferocious tigers and crocodiles. Two, it is identified with a barbaric custom of infanticide practiced by the Hindu devotees who lived on Sagar Island. The place became yet another theatre for the interaction of European cells and Indian others. Conservation efforts began in the Sundarbans during the later half of the 19th century, as the area was declared a protected forest as part of a general policy that led to the reserving of a fifth of the land area of British India as government forest between 1878 and 1900. To the purpose of increasing revenue and upgrading a growing stock of various kinds of timber, fueled by such selfish motives, the efforts became more and more problematic, as besides placing the forest under protection, the government gradually introduced user fees, licenses, and tolls under the pretext of preserving the diminishing natural resources. The customary users of the Sundarbans saw this as detested intrusions of the state. Otherizing the local natives gradually paved the way for their marginalization in the state imaginary, which eventually leads to the blatant disregard of their needs while devising the forest policies. Unfortunately, such practices have largely continued in post-colonial India as well. After the ban on tiger shooting in 1970, the Wildlife Protection Act, and the setting up of Indian Wildlife Board in 1972, the government of India officially launched the Project Tiger program in 1973 in 9 reserve forests, including the Sundarbans. In the Sundarbans, the implementation of Project Tiger involved the displacement of many villages from the buffer zone. The price for setting up a tiger reserve was largely paid by the locals, as hundreds of people had to be relocated at short notice for each tiger being protected. The post-colonial project of tiger conservation, much like its colonial predecessors, has largely refused to take into consideration the needs of the indigenous people of the area, most of whom are desperately poor. It has deprived them of the right to use the forest, which has been preserved only for animals. Though on paper, the Biosphere Reserve and Sundarban Tiger Conservation programs are supposed to encourage the participation of local communities, the on-ground implementation of tiger conservation has neglected the enormous knowledge of the people of Sundarbans about their ecosystem and the local wildlife. The local communities have never been asked to become a part of the decision-making processes, and yet it is they who have to bear the brunt of the conservation efforts made by the government, which continues to operate in these areas with little less than colonial audacity. This paper attempts to show how the local people are increasingly obliterated from the view of the urban populace by marginalizing them in popular representations of the region. One such influential terrain is the Bengali young adult adventure stories written in the backdrop of the Sundarbans, where the local residents are almost always reduced to powerless spectators or prejudiced villains, as the Bhadralok protagonists make their way through this hostile land. I examined 3 such works: Jongoler Moddhe Gambus 1979 and Khali Jahajer Rahasya 1983 by Sunil Gangopadhyay and Sundarbone 1980 by Taposh Gangopadhyay, in order to show how the local people in these narratives are largely deprived of their agency and incorporated within the landscape as a homogeneous whole, providing a backdrop for the urban Bhadralok from Calcutta to indulge in exciting experiences. Significantly, all these works are written after the highly publicized launch of the Project Tiger program in the Sundarbans by the Indira Gandhi-led government of India, which explains the surge of interest regarding this region among the urban Bengalis during this period. and their wish to educate the young readers about the place. Furthermore, in sharp contrast to the Bengali young adult adventure narratives written during 1930s and 40s by early pioneers of the genre, such as Hemendra Kumar Roy and Premendra Mitro, none of these works feature any scene of big game hunting in order to stay in tune with the recent efforts at conservation. All three books, however, repeat the recognizable trope of the educated Bengali hero from the urban center undertaking a trip to the perilous periphery. Jongoler Moddhe Gombuj by Sunil Gangobadhyay, one of the most prolific writers ever in the Bengali language, begins with Biman and Shopon, two college students from Calcutta, accompanied by a young police officer named Priyobroto, visiting the Sundarbans with an elderly acquaintance Jyotira, who owns a bheri there. The author himself notes, the prawns reared at the bheri get exported to the USA. It is significant how the principal characters in the story represent the three main institutions facilitating colonial rule in India: Western education, law and order, and global capitalism. The way Jyotira is shown to run the bheri can be termed as a sort of enlightened feudalism. He does love the local people serving at the bheri as fishermen or guards, but his authority remains absolute. The excessive care that Jyotira and his friends receive from the employees confirm the fact that the local people have almost no agency here. The scene where Jyotira ensures loyalty from them by distributing packets of cigarettes is highly questionable, reminding one of Stefano and Trinculo impressing Caliban by giving him alcoholic drinks in Shakespeare's The Tempest. Ironically, the only locals who seem to have any agency in this story are the smugglers led by Horen Pal, who try to close down the bheri as its operation seriously interferes in their activities. However, the plot fails and the entire gang gets captured. The concluding part, where an imprisoned Horen gets slapped in turn by the poor fishermen of the bheri, might seem as a proper moment of proletarian justice, but is not so, as the entire scene is orchestrated by Jyotira himself. The local people function as obedient puppets of their Bhadralok employer, and the smuggler is singled out as the sole person responsible for their deprivation. In the light of the disastrous consequences that bheri farming has had on the environment and lives of the locals alike in the Sundarbans, choosing a bheri owner from Calcutta as the hero of a young adult novel seemed a problematic choice indeed. Khali Jahajer also features Gangobadhyay's famed Siloth Kaka Babu, a specially abled former archaeologist who embarks on various adventures with his college-going nephew Shontu. The relatively ignorant and otherized view.
But you need to sum up.
Okay. The relatively ignorant and otherized view of the Sundarbans shared among the average Bengali youth get echoed in the conversation between Kakababu and Biman. It is interesting to note how little of Khali Jahajer Roshu is actually about the people of Sundarbans. Most of the narrative space is taken up by the police launch carrying the three visitors and a bunch of high-ranking police officers originally hailing from the metropole. As in Jongoler Moddhe Gombuj, the only locals who have any voice in this narrative are the anti-social ones, the robbers who mistakenly tried to target the police launch, and the gang of smugglers led by Harut of Adar. Till the end of the narrative, when Igmar's felt is rescued, Khali Jahajer also consistently delegates the local residents to the sidelines, continuing to be a story of the urban Bhadralok, rescuing an enlightened white man from the look at life in the Sundarbans. Nitai, the youngest son in a family of Bangladeshi immigrants in South Calcutta, is a student with abysmally low grades at school. During the summer vacation, he is sent away as a sort of punishment to live with his uncle Dinu Mama, a forest ranger at the Sundarbans. However, the experience happens to be a memorable one for him, as it teaches him to view life itself in a broader perspective. Soon after learning about the biodiversity of Sundarbans, Nitai gets to know the extreme hardships faced by local fishermen like Okil, Profullo and Dinomundu, most of whom struggle to make the ends meet on a daily basis. However, at the end of the story, Nitai returns to Calcutta, helping to apprehend criminals and hand them over to the SDPO Shondi Mukherjee, bagging a government medal in the process, while the locals, quite expectedly, vanish from the narrative. Therefore, it is ironical to note that it is the Bhadralok boy who must reach manhood in order to end the sufferings of the villagers, while they themselves, being full-grown adults, must remain thoroughly deprived of any agency throughout the narrative. Whereas Bengali young adult fiction written in the backdrop of the Sundarbans during the late 70s and 80s deliberately eschewed the element of hunting in the wake of newly undertaken conservation programs, the representation of locals continued to be problematic. The protagonists of these stories predominantly hail from upper-class urban backgrounds, going into the wild in order to prove their mettle and masculinity, while the local people are consistently marginalized, almost always reduced to powerless spectators or prejudiced villains. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bhattacharya. That was a good look at the young adult fiction of two different areas. We shall come back to it
Thank you, sir.
again. I now invite Dr. Pavitra Kumar Rana to make his presentation. Pavitra, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
And once again, we are back to the Hungry Tide. Go on.
But is my video visible? I'm not sure. I'm presenting from a
You're
mobile.
not visible. You're not visible.
No, your video is not visible.
What happened? Whatever. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Please proceed.
Okay, let's start. So the title of my paper is The Crisis of Modernity, Reflections on Subjective and Objective Approaches to Place in the Hungry Tide. In modern period, a geographical site is broadly mapped through two contradictory perspectives. It is viewed either through an objective or through a subjective gauge. Proponents of enlightenment have viewed the specificity of place and the variety of human life in terms of detached, objective, universal criteria. Opponents of the Enlightenment, however, advocate that a place should be viewed through concentrated, particularistic criteria and in terms of its unique specificities. J. Nicholas Entricken, in his famous book, The Betweenness of Place Towards a Geography of Modernity, has said that the gap between these two perspectives is the perceived crisis of modernity. Amitav Ghosh's The Hungry Tide very beautifully exposes this gap, the crisis of modernity, and makes us rethink our cherished ideas concerning the universality of modernity to comprehend all the places in the world. We all know the Hungry Tide is set in the enigmatic liminal place of the Sundarbans. We find in the novel that the highly educated rationalist visitors like Nirmal and Kanai try to gauge the site through an objective lens, and consequently they make fun of the locals' unshakable faith in the Bonbibi legend. Their disconcerting experience at Gorjantola, however, reveals the limitation of their detached, reductive, universalist perspective to comprehend the unique specificity of the Sundarbans. On the other hand, illiterate local folks like Horen and Kanai, they feel quite ease at the Sundarbans, and because they view their relationship with the place is quite a subjective one, they navigate the danger-laden and precarious site by relying on the mercy of Bonbibi, who is the living reality for them and whom they revere most. After their pathetic and humbling experience at Gorjantola, we all know what happened in Gorjantola. Because of time constraints, I'm not going into that. So let me just focus on what came out of that experience, of that episode. So after their pathetic and humbling experience at Gorjantola, both Nirmal and Kanai realized that Bonbibi's story is not a mere legend for the people of Sundarbans. It is a story that is embedded in the very land and animates it. It is a story that establishes a spiritual bond between Horen, Phokir, and the Tide country, making it a place for them, quote unquote place. When I say place, I mean that there is a kind of, meaning generating relationship between the geographical site and its inhabitants. There is a kind of spiritual, affectionate bond between the place and its inhabitants. So Kanai in particular realizes that the Tide country is an extension of the selves of people like Horen and Phokir. And after their humbling experience, what happens? Both Nirmal and Kanai, though the two episodes happen at the space of 32 years, so their experience is almost similar. Even Kanai's experience is more pathetic to a large extent. And we find that both of them realize that the ethos of modernity or rationality is not very effective to comprehend the precarious site of the Sundarbans, and there are other forms of knowledge or other forms of worldviews which are essential for the place and which are essential for the survival of people in particular places like the Sundarbans. So on the whole, what Ghosh does in the novel, Ghosh brings out this crisis, this gap between the two perspectives, and also points out the limitation of the universalist approach to understand all the places in the world. So what this novel on the whole does is that it makes us, it forces us to reevaluate our ideas of modernity, or to be particular, rationality, to understand all the places, right? And on the other hand, we need to, so what we need to do, we need to incorporate other worldviews, place specific worldviews, place specific epistemologies to understand certain places in the world. But in doing so, the novel in no way reverses the binary of modernity or indigeneity, modernity and indigeneity. Rather, it only makes us realize the coexistence of multiple epistemologies in the world, and where no any particular epistemology or no particular worldview is the ultimate worldview. Rather, we should create a space where there should be multiple epistemologies to better understand the world that we live in. So I think, keeping in mind the time constraint, I am done. I should stop here. So this was my paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Pavitra, and you have stuck to the time very well. That was another interesting look at the Hungry Tide. There are 5 papers here on Hungry Tide, so I'll come back to all of them. May I now invite Dr. Hua Yakub from the Department of English, Maulana Azad National Urdu University. Dr. Yakub.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, everyone. And with the permission of the chair, shall I begin with my paper? Yes, Hungry Tide, I think, is a favorite novel amongst many of us. And so again, I am also dealing with the same novel. The title of my paper is Mapping the Sundarbans, Animal and Plant Geography in Amitav Ghosh's The Hungry Tide. Trailing lazily on the border of India and Bangladesh is this huge archipelago of islands known as Sundarbans, declared a World Heritage Site by UNESCO and is also listed as wetland of international importance in Ramsar Convention. The area still remains largely unexplored due to its rough and unpredictable terrain. The place is defined by its flora and fauna, which is rare and unique to this fragile ecosystem. My paper examines Amitav Ghosh's 2004 novel, The Hungry Tide, to explore the spirit and sense of Sundarbans and how this place, which itself is in a continuous state of flux, defines and affects the lives of the people who inhabit it and also those who are thrown on its spatial contours either by sheer destiny or have embraced it purposely and professionally. The paper further explores how Amitav Ghosh etches the presence of the non-human world and its contiguity with the humans. Humanistic geography defines place as a site which gains its meaning through the position and experiences of people. David Seaman and Jacob Sowers, discussing about Relf's idea of place and placelessness, observe that, and I quote, space and place are dialectically structured in human environmental experience, since our understanding of space is related to the places we inhabit, which in turn derive meaning from their spatial context. Unquote. They further opine that, and I quote, the continuing dissolution of places and insideness in the world helps to explain the escalating erosion of civility and civilization, unquote. J.N. Entriken, in his book, The Betweenness of Place Towards a Geography of Modernity, observes that a place can be divided into objective and subjective, where objective qualifies for natural situation and subjective indicates the meaning it garners through individual experiences, which give a unique dimension to the geographical place. The narrative of The Hungry Tide succeeds in effortlessly blending the objective and subjective dimensions of Sundarbans, thus making the readers encounter what Entriken defines as betweenness of place. Anu Jales, in her book Forest of Tigers, People, Politics and Environment in the Sundarbans, opines that, and I quote, the inhabitants of the Sundarbans could be called environmental determinists, so strong is their belief that the environment affects them, unquote. In his novel, The Hungry Tide, Amitav Ghosh makes Sundarbans tangible for his readers. The place has not been used as a mere backdrop to the story, but emerges as the most important character in the novel, having a spirit and soul of its own. Sundarbans is a dynamic site which affects the people who come to inhabit it and is itself in a continuous state of flux by the tidal movements and by the anthropogenic activities. Its location is strongly influenced by its natural situation as well. And I quote from the novel, "There are no borders here to divide fresh water from salt, river from sea. The tides reach as far as 300 kilometers inland, and every day thousands of acres of forest disappear underwater only to re-emerge hours later. The currents are so powerful as to reshape the islands almost daily. Some days the water tears away entire promontories and peninsulas. At other times, it throws up new shelves and sandbanks where there were none before." Now, I move on to the animal and plant geographies, which Amitav Ghosh has unraveled in a wonderful way. The geographies which mold Sundarbans go beyond human experiences and the workings of the ebb and flow of the tides and are animated by the presence of its rich and diverse flora and fauna. Anujelis observes that, and I quote, "The region is famous today is not so much because of its constantly changing environment and the way humans live with it, but the fact that it is the largest remaining natural habitat of the Bengal tiger, providing a home to an estimated 600 tigers from both sides of the Bengali border," unquote. The narrative engages with the centrality of animal and plant geographies in the world of Sundarbans, and Ghosh creates several scenes of intersections of human and the non-human world. The region is also home to a rare variety of river dolphins, the Irrawaddy dolphins, crabs, estuarine crocodiles, and snakes. Ghosh creates an intense drama of human follies and foibles, which is simultaneously and evocatively peopled with non-human world, where Piali Roy, a marine biologist, has come to research on Irrawaddy dolphins, develops a special bond with Fokir, who lives with the dual identity of being a local and a refugee as well. Fokir extends great help to Pia in locating the movement of Irrawaddy dolphins because of his familiarity and immense knowledge about the rivers and streams in the area. Animals and plants gain a mythical and mystical dimension in this magical environment. The myth of Bonbaby in the novel.
Madam, I request you to sum up the argument.
Could you please end in a minute?
Okay. I was talking about the myth of the Bonbaby, and this reflects. This is itself is a reflection of the human virtues and vices. The dolphins have been friends and companions to Fokir as he reminisces about his mother Kusum, and he tells Pia about that. So I will skip this and directly come to the concluding part, some concluding remarks. Amitav Ghosh has effectively portrayed the interconnectedness of animal and plant geographies with humans as a continuously evolving phenomenon in the Sundarbans, as this harsh terrain provides sustainable living, refuge, and resources to the most underprivileged sections of the society, and simultaneously conjures charm and awe for the global elite. The rare and endangered flora and fauna of Sundarbans is facing a grave threat from anthropogenic activities, and there is an urgent need to save this unique and beautiful ecosystem. Ghosh has done his bit as a creative writer by addressing this issue through his engaging narrative and by recreating the geography of Sundarbans with its various hues of human emotions and experiences, and has helped to reconstruct the place called Sundarbans. Thank you.
Thank you. That was yet another engrossing paper on the habitat. And we now come to the final paper of the session to be presented by Deepak Kumar Mandal. After this, I think we can take some questions from the audience. Now I invite Deepak Kumar Mandal to make his presentation. Deepak Kumar Mandal.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello. Yes, sir.
Proceed with your paper.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good evening to all. I am proud to be here. My paper topic, Nature as an Important Backdrop, a reading of Amitav Ghosh, The Hungry Tide Pulled Through the Lens of Criticism. Beauty is nothing but the start of terror we can hardly bear. and we adore it because of the spin scorn it would kill us with. Nature plays an important role in the works of poets and other writers. From the time literature has emerged, there has been a close relationship between nature and man that they are interdependent and interrelated. Ecology, a new science, deals with the relationship between living beings and their environments. The living beings include plants, animals, and people who are all related to each other and their environments. India is a country with a variety of ecosystems. The beauty and power of nature is reflected in the literary works of the whole world. The reflection has paved the way of the rise of a new branch of literacy theory called criticism. In India English literature, Amitabh Ghosh is one of the writers who has focused on nature. My paper focused on the dynamic ecological system of the Sundarbans and the hundred of islands which forms the backdrop of his novel The Hungry Tide. William Rackett was the first one of use all eco-criticism in his article Literature and Ecology, an Experiment in Eco-Criticism in 1978. Ecology in the study of nature, and it is a way of thinking about nature. Eco-criticism is the study of relationship between literature and the environment. It is a broad genre that it is known by many names like ecopoetics, environment studies, green culture studies, green literature, etc. Eco-criticism also referred to the interrelation of nature, culture, and supernatural phenomena. The settings of the novel, The Hungry Tide, is the place, the interpost between the sea and the plains of Bengal, or lies an immense the archipelago of islands. When in the beginning of the novel, Pia was telling Kanai that he was a ecologist and she is doing a survey of the marine animals of the Sundarbans. Kanai was amazed and said that he did not know there were any such, and he heard about only tigers and crocodiles. We answered him that they are used to be large number of them, and say the population has kind of disappeared from view. The Sundarbans is a place where tigers kill hundreds of people a year. Since the tiger was a protected species, killing a tiger that was a prey of village government authorities to meet our punishment. While he feels himself to be superior to fakir on the river, he needs fakir skills to provide for his survival. Pia, who feels closer to the animals, she studies needs Kanai translated of the rivers and would life of her to do her research. This is an cooperative relationship between humanity and nature. For the inhabitants of the tide country, they are themselves part of environment. And the wildlife conservation crop, it is not only the kusum, but all the people feels that the oats part of was not hunger of the thirst. He was to sit here helpless and listening of the policemen making their announcements, hearing them say our lips, our existence was worthless then, dot or dust.
Could you please
They
come to the
all
conclusion in
explain
brief?
the feelings of despair and powerlessness of the people as the
Sorry to
scene of
interrupt, Mr. Deepak Kumar Mondal, but you need to sum up. Okay, you have exceeded the time.
thank you, sir.
Okay. Give one concluding sentence to round up your paper. Deepak Mondal.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, you have concluded.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are at the end of a very engrossing session where we had quite predictably and quite justifiably an overbearing presence of Amitabh Ghosh and, to be more specific, the Meteorite. If I may just have one or two sentences about the papers presented. Obrapal's paper tried to examine two novels of Amitabh Ghosh from the bi-regional perspective. And though the time did not allow her to go into theoretical groundings, her paper presented some interesting insights. Then Animesh Bhatt highlighted the different aspects of the concept of hinterland, the psychological, the cultural, the metaphorical, and at the end he was coming to the linguistic aspect associated with it, but once again we had the time constraint. Now, Dr. Vipranarayan Bhattacharya's paper very effectively pointed out the differences in approach of the Bhadra Samaj of the 1930s towards Sundarban and those of the novels of 1970. Dr. Pavitra Rana's paper obviously highlighted the crisis of modernity and the limitations of a somewhat homogeneous universalist approach. Dr. Huma Yaqub's paper showed how Sundarban emerged as a character having its own soul, and how the flora and the fauna of the place occupied the central space. Finally, Deepak Kumar Mondal came up with an attempt at eco-critical analysis of the Handit. But interestingly, there were 5 papers on the Handitite, and there was no repetition in a way. The paper presenters, fine young scholars as they are, they tried to look at the novel from different perspectives, which I think has been very engrossing for the audience. So now, if there is any question on any of these papers, I think we can take 2 or 3. Mr. Rick Shaka, is there any question on these two?
Yes, sir. With the permission of you, I will make questions. Yes.
Am I allowed to speak?
Yes,
It is
yes.
not
Please
a
go
question.
on. Please go on. Yes.
Yes, go.
It's just an observation on Mr. Deepak Mandal's paper. See, my whole PhD was on eco-criticism. I studied the works of Barbara Kingsolver. So what I found in your studies, and I think Professor Maite will agree with me and the other profs presented here, that you have mixed up everything, like what is eco-criticism, what is nature writing, what is green cultural studies, what is environment. So it is my suggestion that first you go back and read 2 Bibles of eco-criticism. One, Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, and the second one, the whole theoretical Bible, Cheryl Glotfelty and Harold Foam's book, The Eco-Criticism Reader. So in that introduction, in Cheryl Gladfeld's introduction, you will find that nature writing is completely different from eco-criticism. Eco-criticism is something when we focus on the ecological crisis, whereas nature writing is not focusing on the eco-critical crisis. So the writers who are writing in 1960s, 40s, they were more focused on nature writing, whereas once we are coming into this age of Anthropocene, we are considering the eco-critical crisis. So it is my suggestion that there are many books available in LibGen. There is a, I should not say, but you will get the books online and you read the theory, because you said all things are synonymous. These are not synonymous. I think you can find all the books. And what I find that you quoted William Rupert, you quoted Gladfeld's definition, but these all you are quoting from the internet sources, I think, without any in-depth theoretical underpinning. And I must suggest that since if you are a beginner researcher, for 1 year you should study all what is called eco-criticism. Thank you. I think Professor Maiti will agree with me that the theoretical underpinning is needed. Like it's the best for any kind of critical analysis, and also the other professors. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bhavna, for your observation. I hope Deepak is here and he will.
Thank you. I hope I'm not too
Yes,
harsh. I just told him I was about to spoke about the unethical sites also. Sorry for that, but he should read the theoretical book.
Okay, any more questions? We would like to have questions. Okay. Okay, since there is no questions, I would officially end this session.
So just before we come to an end, I would like to thank the organizers of the two colleges, the authorities, the principals, the department, colleagues at the two departments, Seva, Mahavidyalaya and Subarnarekha Mahavidyalaya, especially and Seva. They are well known to me. They are also fine young scholars, and the session has been extremely enriching for me, and I think for all of us who were present on this virtual plane. The time constraint probably was a bit of a hindrance, but we have to go on with it. I look forward to meet these young scholars more on maybe some other platform. So thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for chairing the session, and a big round of thanks to all the paper presenters in this session for presenting wonderful papers on divergent topics. Now, with that, we move to the valedictory session.
Okay.
And
Rasdeep will answer it later. Any other question?
And I would request the participant will bear with us because the feedback link will be provided shortly in the chat box, and I would request the participant to fill up the feedback form once it is available in the chat box. So please have a bit patience with us.
Sir, it's already.
Yes, the feedback link has been provided in the chat box. And a quick reminder to all the participants that the feedback link will remain active for 1 hour. Afterwards, there will be no feedback form. So I would request all the participants to fill up the feedback form in order to get their certificates. And with that, we move to the concluding portion of our webinar. Throughout these 2 days, we had seen many wonderful papers being presented on diverse topics within the rubric of geocriticism. And with that, now may I request Dr. Kathakali Bandyopadhyay, IQAC coordinator of Subarnarekha Mahavidyalaya, to offer the formal vote of thanks. Yes, I would now request Dr. Kathakali Bandyopadhyay to offer the formal vote of thanks on this occasion.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes, sir. A very hearty good afternoon to the ladies and gentlemen, professors, scholars, dignitaries, and my loving students. At the very outset, I feel extensively glad to have this opportunity and obviously privileged to provide the vote of thanks. I provide my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Shomit Kumar Maiti of Seva Bharati Mahavidyalaya, the organizing secretary and convener of the webinar. I do thank the other co-convener, of course, our dearest Showman Jana of Subarnarekha Mahavidyalaya, for his extensive effort to make this webinar a great success. A warm thanks from the core of the heart to be provided to the alma mater, Dr. Devaprasad Shahu, Principal, Seva Bharati Mahavidyalaya, and Mr. Lokhinder Paloi, Teacher in Charge, Subarnarekha Mahavidyalaya. Without their permission of coming together, this webinar would not have been possible. We are blessed here to have our renowned national and international speakers who has enshrined our podium. Dr. Robert Titali has classically explained the vivid ideas of geocriticism and its applicability and significance in the literary world. Our stage has been hallowed with the presence of Dr. Shankar Prasad Singha, former professor, Department of English, Vidyasagar University. We also had Dr. Joyjit Ghosh, professor, Department of English, Vidyasagar University, to act as a chairperson of the technical session 2. My heartfelt gratitude goes to Dr. Ujjwal Kumar Panda, who has beautifully excavated our childhood love of Professor Shonku's stories and has made a descriptive critical discussion of the concept of making and unmaking of place within that story. We are really obliged to Dr. Gautam Buddha Surel, Professor, Department of English, Bankura University, to act as the chairperson of the technical session 4, Dr. Snehashish Maiti, Associate Professor, Prabhatkar College, Kontai, for gracing the chair in technical session 5, and Dr. Devdas Roy, Associate Professor and Head, Department of English, Shukumar Sengupta Mahavidyalaya. The time has ripened definitely to thank the real coordinators who monitored the session for the past 2 days, the master makers of this webinar, without whose interference this would not have been successful. I provide my due respect and thanks to Sanjay Dash and Mr. Rick Sardar, Associate Professors of both Subarnarekha Mahavidyalaya and Seva Bharati, for their beautiful coordination for both of the days. I provide thanks to the man behind the technical glues, Mr. Tanmoy Sarkar of Seva Bharati Mahavidyalaya, and Mr. Manush Kumar Bhuiya of Subarnarekha Mahavidyalaya. I do thank Mr. Lakhikanta Chatterjee, Shubhankar Acharya, Animesh Datta, Somnath Das, and all other valuable members of the organizing committee. We provided true respect towards the honorable members of the advisory committee who have agreed to come and grace our webinar. Last but not the least, the participants, the paper presenters from India and abroad, and also to the research scholars and students. It is your active participation which has made this webinar to reach its zenith. Thank you. And also I thank each and every person who is behind this webinar. Have a very good night and a great thanks from our part for joining this webinar. Good night to all.
Thank you,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for that. We come to the end of the webinar. Stay well and good night.